The blood on Priscilla Grayson's hands had dried brown by the time she collapsed in front of the church, and she knew that no amount of praying would bring her brother back from the dead. It was June 1878 in Downieville, California, a gold mining town nestled in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where hope came to die alongside dreams of striking it rich. Priscilla had arrived 3 days earlier on a stagecoach with her younger brother Samuel, both of them orphaned and desperate for a fresh start after their parents had succumbed to fever back in Missouri. Samuel had been 19, full of ambition and foolish bravery. She was 22 and had tried to be the voice of reason, but reason had no place in a card game with men who valued gold more than life. The church steps were hard beneath her knees, and the mountain air bit at her exposed skin despite the summer month. Her dress was torn at the hem, stained with dirt and her brother's blood. She had held him as he died in that saloon, a bullet in his chest from a card dealer who claimed Samuel had been cheating. He hadn't been. Samuel could barely keep track of his own cards, let alone stack a deck. "Please," Priscilla whispered to the wooden cross above the church door. "Please, I need a miracle. I cannot do this alone." She had no money left. The small amount they had saved was gone, spent on the stagecoach fare and a single night's lodging. Samuel's body was being held by the undertaker, who demanded payment before he would even consider a burial. The sheriff had been no help, claiming there were witnesses who swore Samuel had been cheating and that the shooting was justified. Priscilla knew better. She had seen the fear in Samuel's eyes when that dealer had accused him, had watched her brother reach for his pocket to show he had nothing to hide, and the dealer had drawn his pistol faster than lightning. Now she was alone in a town that chewed up innocents and spat out their bones. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and winter would come to these mountains whether she was prepared or not. Death seemed like a patient companion, waiting just around the corner. The church door remained closed. No divine light broke through the clouds. No angels descended with answers. But hoofbeats echoed down the dirt street behind her. Priscilla did not turn. She kept her eyes fixed on that cross, kept her hands clasped together even though they trembled with exhaustion and grief. The horse came to a stop somewhere behind her, and she heard the creak of leather as someone dismounted. "Miss." The voice was deep, cautious, with a gentleness that seemed out of place in this harsh town. Priscilla finally turned her head and found herself looking at a man who stood with his hat in his hands, his dark hair slightly too long beneath where the hat had been. He was tall, broad-shouldered in the way of men who worked hard for their living, and his face was weathered by sun and wind. But his eyes were what caught her attention. They were brown and warm, filled with a concern that seemed genuine. "Miss, are you hurt?" he asked, taking a step closer. Priscilla looked down at her hands at the dried blood. "Not my blood." The man's jaw tightened. He could not have been much older than 30, and he wore the clothes of a working cowboy, dusty denim trousers, a worn shirt, a leather vest, and a bandana around his neck. A revolver sat in a holster at his hip, but he made no move toward it. "You need help?" he asked. The question was so simple, so direct, that Priscilla felt something crack inside her chest. She had been holding everything together through sheer will, had forced herself to be strong through Samuel's death, and the sheriff's indifference and the undertaker's cold demands. But this stranger's kindness, unexpected and unearned, broke through her defenses like water through a dam. "I need a miracle," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need someone to tell me this is all a nightmare and I will wake up back home with my family alive and well." The man was quiet for a moment, then he moved closer and knelt down on the church steps beside her. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the scar on his chin, the calluses on his hands. He looked at her with an intensity that made her heart skip. "I cannot give you that," he said quietly. "But let me be the answer to your prayer. Let me help you with whatever trouble you are facing right now in this moment. Sometimes that is all we can do. Take things one moment at a time." Priscilla stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit or ulterior motive. She found none. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." "My name is Jacob Hayes," he said. "And you are right, I do not know you. But I know what it looks like when someone is at the end of their rope, and I know what it is like to need help and have no one offer it. So I am offering now. What is your name?" "Priscilla Grayson." "Miss Grayson, tell me what happened." So she did. The words came pouring out, the whole terrible story from the moment they arrived in Downieville to Samuel's death to her current predicament. Jacob listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she spoke. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as though he were grinding his teeth. "The dealer who shot your brother," he finally said. "Was his name Carson?" Priscilla nodded. "Richard Carson, do you know him?" "Everyone knows him. He runs crooked games at the Silver Dollar Saloon and has the sheriff in his pocket. Your brother was not the first man he has accused of cheating, and he will not be the last." Jacob stood up, his hands clenching into fists. "And the undertaker is Bernard Mills, I would wager, trying to squeeze money out of you when you have none. He wants $50 for a burial." Jacob's mouth twisted. "That is 3 times what it should cost. He is taking advantage of your situation." He turned to look at her fully, and Priscilla saw the resolve in his eyes. "Come with me. We are going to settle this." "I have no money," Priscilla said, but she stood anyway, her legs shaky beneath her. "I know, but I do." Jacob placed his hat back on his head. "I have been working cattle drives for the past 5 years, saving every penny. I have enough to cover your brother's burial and then some." Priscilla shook her head quickly. "I cannot accept that. I cannot take your money when I have no way to repay you." "Who said anything about repayment?" Jacob offered her his arm. "Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. You can pay me back when you are on your feet again. But right now, your brother deserves a decent burial and you deserve a safe place to stay and a hot meal. Let me help you with that much at least." She wanted to refuse. Pride told her to stand on her own to figure this out herself. But practicality won out over pride. She had no other options, no other hope. And this man, this stranger named Jacob Hayes, was offering her exactly what she had prayed for. "All right," she said softly and took his arm. Jacob's horse was a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes. He helped Priscilla up into the saddle, then swung up behind her. She stiffened at the intimacy of the position, but Jacob kept a respectful distance, his arms on either side of her to hold the reins but not touching her otherwise. They rode to the undertaker's establishment first, a small building that smelled of chemicals and death. Bernard Mills was a thin man with a pointed face and greedy eyes. He looked surprised to see Priscilla return with a man at her side. "Miss Grayson," Mills said, his tone unctuous. "Have you reconsidered my offer? I can provide a very basic service for $45 instead of $50 if that helps." "You will provide a proper burial service for $20, Jacob said, his voice hard as iron. "A decent coffin, a plot in the cemetery, and a marker with the boy's name. You will do it today and you will do it right." Mills's eyes darted between them. "Now see here, I have costs to consider." "And I have a knowledge of what those costs actually are," Jacob interrupted. $20 or I take Miss Grayson to the circuit judge when he comes through next week, and we file a complaint about your price gouging. Your choice." The undertaker's face flushed, but he must have seen something in Jacob's expression that warned him against arguing further. "Fine. $20, but I will need payment up front." Jacob pulled a leather pouch from his vest and counted out the money. Priscilla watched, her throat tight. This stranger was giving up his hard-earned wages for a dead boy he had never met, and she could not understand why. People were not this kind, not in her experience. There had to be some catch, some expectation she was not seeing yet. But if there was, Jacob gave no sign of it. He simply paid the undertaker, made arrangements for Samuel's burial that afternoon, and then led Priscilla back out into the sunlight. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt inadequate. "I do not know how to repay such kindness." "Then do not worry about repaying it," Jacob said. He looked down at her, and something softened in his expression. "You have been through hell, Miss Grayson. Let yourself accept help without counting the cost. Now, when did you last eat?" Priscilla tried to remember. "Yesterday morning, I think. Maybe the morning before that." Jacob's frown deepened. "Come on. The boarding house serves a decent lunch, and you need food in you before you fall over." The boarding house was run by a matronly woman named Mrs. Chen, whose family had come from China during the gold rush years. She took one look at Priscilla's bedraggled state and immediately hustled her upstairs to a washroom, providing clean water and a simple but clean dress that had belonged to her daughter. "You wash up, dear," Mrs. Chen said in her accented but clear English. "I will have food ready when you come down. That man who brought you, he is a good one. You are lucky he found you." Priscilla nodded mutely and waited until Mrs. Chen left before she finally allowed herself to break down. She stood in that small washroom and sobbed, the grief pouring out of her in waves. Samuel was dead. Her baby brother, the only family she had left in the world, was dead. She had failed to protect him. She had failed at the one job that mattered. But eventually, the tears ran dry. Priscilla washed the blood from her hands, scrubbed her face until her skin was pink, and changed into the borrowed dress. It was a bit large on her, but it was clean and whole, and it did not carry the stains of tragedy. She braided her honey-colored hair, pinched her cheeks to bring some color back into them, and went downstairs. Jacob was waiting at a table near the window. He stood when she entered, his hat still in his hands, and Priscilla saw something flicker in his eyes as he looked at her. Appreciation, perhaps, or surprise. She had not considered what she looked like, but she supposed that beneath the dirt and blood and grief, she was still a reasonably attractive woman. Her mother had always said she had pretty eyes, green as spring grass. "You look better," Jacob said simply and pulled out a chair for her. Mrs. Chen brought out plates of roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables. Priscilla's stomach growled at the sight, and she ate with single-minded focus, barely tasting the food in her hunger. Jacob ate more slowly, watching her with those thoughtful brown eyes. "Where are you from originally?" he asked. "Missouri. A small town called Liberty. My parents had a farm there. They died of fever last winter. Samuel and I tried to keep the farm going, but we lost it to debt." Priscilla set down her fork, her appetite fading as she spoke. "We heard there were opportunities out west. Jobs, land, a chance to start fresh. Samuel was so excited. He thought we would make our fortune and build a new life." "I am sorry," Jacob said, and he sounded like he meant it. "What about you?" Priscilla asked, wanting to turn the conversation away from her own tragedies. "Where are you from?" "Texas, originally. A ranch near San Antonio, but I left home when I was 18 and have been drifting ever since." Jacob leaned back in his chair. "I have worked cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, tried my hand at prospecting in Colorado, even did some time as a ranch hand in Montana. I came to California about 6 months ago, working for a spread up in the hills. The pay is good and the work is honest." "You like it? The drifting, I mean." Jacob was quiet for a moment. "I used to. It felt like freedom, going where I wanted, answering to no one but myself. But lately..." He trailed off, his gaze distant. Lately, it has started to feel more like running than freedom, and I am getting tired of running. Priscilla studied him, this man who had appeared in her darkest moment like an answer to a prayer she had not quite dared to voice. He was handsome in a rugged way, but it was more than that. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that made her feel safe for the first time in days. Weeks, even, maybe longer. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly. "Really? I am a stranger. You owe me nothing." Jacob met her eyes. "About 5 years ago I was in a bad way. I had been beaten and robbed on a road outside of Abilene, left for dead in a ditch. A farmer and his wife found me, took me to their home, nursed me back to health. They fed me, gave me a place to stay, asked for nothing in return. When I tried to thank them, the farmer said something I have never forgotten. He said that we are all just passing through this world, and the only thing that matters is how we treat each other along the way. He said that kindness is the only currency that actually has value." He paused, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I have tried to live by that ever since. I do not always succeed, but when I saw you on those church steps, I saw someone who needed help and I had the means to provide it. It is as simple as that." "It is not simple," Priscilla said. "It is extraordinary, and I will find a way to repay you, I promise." "The only repayment I want is to see you safe and settled," Jacob said firmly. "Now we should talk about your situation. You cannot stay in Downieville. There is nothing here for you, and winter in these mountains is brutal. Do you have any other family? Anyone who could take you in?" Priscilla shook her head. "No, it was just Samuel and me. Our parents were only children and our grandparents are all dead. Friends back in Missouri, none who could afford another mouth to feed. Times are hard everywhere." Jacob nodded slowly, his brow furrowed in thought. "What about work? Do you have any skills, any training?" "I can cook, clean, tend a garden. I helped my mother run the household and worked the farm alongside my father and Samuel. I can read and write and do figures." Priscilla lifted her chin, trying to muster some dignity. "I am not afraid of hard work, Mr. Hayes. I am willing to do whatever it takes to support myself." "I believe you," Jacob said. "And it is Jacob, please. Mr. Hayes makes me feel like my father." He drummed his fingers on the table. "The problem is that jobs for women in towns like this are limited and often unpleasant. There are the saloons, but I would not recommend that path. There is domestic work, but most families here are miners or businessmen who either cannot afford help or already have it. And the respectable positions like teaching or nursing usually require connections or credentials you do not have." Priscilla felt her brief hope deflating. "So what do you suggest?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him weighing options, discarding them, considering new ones. Finally, he said, "Come work for me." She blinked. "What?" "I have been saving money because I plan to buy land. There is a valley about 20 miles north of here, good grazing land with water rights and timber. The owner is an old rancher named Thomas Grant, and he is looking to sell because his health is failing and his children have no interest in ranching. I have been working for him these past months, learning the property, and we have an agreement in principle. I was planning to finalize the purchase next month." Jacob leaned forward, his eyes intense. "It is a good piece of land, Miss Grayson, big enough to run a decent herd with a house that needs work but has good bones. I was planning to hire help eventually, but I could hire you now. You could cook, keep house, help with the animals. I would pay you fair wages and you would have a safe place to live and work." Priscilla's mind raced. The offer was generous, almost too generous. A job, room and board, safety, everything she needed, but there was an obvious problem. "People would talk," she said carefully. "An unmarried woman living on a ranch with an unmarried man, my reputation would be ruined. "I know," Jacob said. "I have thought of that, which is why I would propose a business arrangement. We could marry, on paper at least. A marriage of convenience, purely practical. You would have my name and my protection, and I would have help running the ranch. No expectations beyond that. Separate rooms, separate lives in terms of personal matters, just two people helping each other out." Priscilla stared at him, her heart pounding. Marriage, to a man she had met only hours ago. It was insane, impossible, utterly mad, and yet, "You would do that?" she asked. "Marry a complete stranger just to give her a job and a respectable situation?" "I would marry a woman who has shown incredible strength in the face of tragedy, who loved her brother enough to stay with him as he died, who prayed for a miracle on church steps when most people would have given up." Jacob's voice was steady, sure. "I think you are exactly the kind of person I would want as a partner in building a ranch. The rest, well, the rest we can figure out as we go. Or not. It would be your choice." Priscilla's thoughts swirled. Every practical bone in her body screamed that this was the answer she needed. A job, security, a fresh start in a place away from the town where her brother died. Jacob seemed like a good man, an honorable man, and he was offering her a way out of an impossible situation with no strings attached. But another part of her, the part that had once dreamed of love and romance and a marriage based on more than practicality, hesitated. Was she really willing to give up on those dreams? To tie herself to a stranger in a business arrangement masquerading as a marriage? Then again, what choice did she have? And was it really so terrible when the stranger in question was a man who had already shown her more kindness than anyone else in this God-forsaken town? "I need time to think," she said finally. Jacob nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need. Samuel's burial is this afternoon. After that, I will get you a room here at the boarding house for a few days while you decide. No pressure, no expectations. Whatever you choose, I will help you figure out your next steps." His understanding, his patience, only made the decision harder. Priscilla had expected him to pressure her, to try to convince her. Instead, he simply finished his coffee and excused himself, saying he had business to attend to but would return for the burial service. Mrs. Chen showed Priscilla to a small but clean room on the second floor. Priscilla sat on the bed, her mind spinning. She tried to think through all the possibilities, all the options. But every path seemed to lead back to Jacob's offer. She could try to find work in Downieville, but as Jacob had pointed out, the options were limited and many were unsavory. She could try to make her way to another town, but she had no money for travel, and no guarantee the situation would be better elsewhere. She could write to acquaintances back in Missouri, but even if someone were willing to help, it would take weeks for letters to arrive, and she needed a solution now. Or she could accept Jacob's offer. Marry him in a business arrangement, work as his housekeeper and ranch hand, build a new life in a place where no one knew her tragic story. It was not the future she had once dreamed of, but it was a future. And after everything that had happened, that was more than she had any right to expect. The burial service was simple and brief. The preacher said words about dust and resurrection that did not bring Priscilla any comfort. She stood beside the grave in her borrowed dress and watched as they lowered Samuel's coffin into the earth. She had not been able to afford a viewing, so she had not seen his face one last time. Her last memory of her brother would be of his eyes going glassy, of his hand going limp in hers, of the blood spreading across his chest. Jacob stood beside her throughout the service, a solid presence in a world that had become untethered. He did not try to touch her or offer platitudes. He simply stood there, bearing witness to her grief, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. After the last shovel of dirt was thrown and the preacher departed, Priscilla remained at the graveside. Jacob waited patiently, his hands folded in front of him, his hat pressed to his chest. "I am sorry, Samuel," Priscilla whispered to the fresh earth. "I am sorry I could not protect you. I am sorry I brought you out here to die. I am sorry for all of it." The grave, of course, offered no response. The dead had no words of comfort for the living. "I am going to accept Jacob's offer," she continued, her voice stronger now. "I am going to marry him and help him build his ranch and make a new life. It is not what we planned, but plans change. You would like him, I think. He is good and kind and strong. He helped me when no one else would." She paused, tears streaming down her face. "I will never forget you, little brother. I will carry you with me always. And I will try to build the kind of life you would have wanted for me. A good life. A happy one if I can manage it. That is my promise to you." Jacob moved closer then, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him beside her. He did not speak, but he offered her his hand. Priscilla took it, his calloused palm rough against hers, and let him lead her away from the grave. They walked in silence back toward town. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful, and Priscilla hated it. How dare the world be beautiful when Samuel was dead? How dare the sun still set and rise as though nothing had changed? "I will marry you," she said abruptly. Jacob stopped walking and turned to face her. "Are you certain?" "No," Priscilla admitted. "I am not certain of anything anymore, but I think it is the right choice, the practical choice. And you have been nothing but kind to me, which is more than I can say for most people. So yes. I will marry you, Jacob Hayes, and I will help you build your ranch, and we will have our business arrangement. On one condition. Name it. If either of us ever changes our mind, if either of us wants something different from this arrangement, we will be honest about it. We will talk about it like adults. No secrets, no resentment. Can you agree to that?" Jacob considered for a moment, then nodded. "I can agree to that. And I will add one condition of my own, if I may. You will not be a servant in my home. You will be my partner in this venture, my equal. You will have a say in decisions about the ranch, about our lives. You will keep your own wages for your own use. And you will be free to leave at any time if you choose, though I hope you will choose to stay. Can you agree to that?" Priscilla felt something loosen in her chest. "Yes. I can agree to that. Then we have an accord." Jacob held out his hand and they shook on it like business partners. But his hand lingered in hers a moment longer than necessary, and Priscilla felt a flutter of something she could not quite name. Not love, not yet, but perhaps the seed of it. The possibility. They were married 2 days later in a ceremony that took less than 10 minutes. The preacher seemed surprised by the haste, but Jacob paid him generously, and he asked no questions. Mrs. Chen and her husband served as witnesses, and Mrs. Chen cried genuine tears of happiness that made Priscilla feel like a fraud. This was not a real marriage, not in the ways that mattered. It was a contract, a business arrangement, a practical solution to an impossible problem. But when Jacob slid the simple gold band onto her finger, when he said the words that bound them together in the eyes of God and the law, Priscilla felt the weight of it. She was married now. She was Priscilla Hayes, wife of Jacob Hayes, and her life had changed irrevocably. After the ceremony, they shared a quiet meal at the boarding house and then retired to separate rooms. Tomorrow, Jacob said, they would ride out to the Grant Ranch. He would introduce her to Thomas Grant, finalize the purchase, and they would begin their new life together. For tonight, though, they both needed rest. Priscilla lay awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. She was married. To a man she had known for less than a week. A man who was still, in many ways, a complete stranger. She knew the broad strokes of his history, but none of the details. She did not know his favorite food or what made him laugh or what he dreamed about at night. She did not know if he snored or if he was a morning person, or if he had any family who might object to his sudden marriage, but she knew he had kind eyes. She knew he had helped her when he had no reason to do so. She knew he had stood beside her at her brother's grave and offered silent support when she needed it most. That would have to be enough. For now, at least, that would have to be enough. The ride to the Grant Ranch took most of the following morning. They left Downieville in the early dawn light, Jacob on his bay gelding and Priscilla on a gentle mare that Jacob had purchased for her. She was not an experienced rider, having spent most of her life on foot or in a wagon, but the mare was patient with her inexperience. The land they traveled through was breathtaking. Pine forests climbed the mountainsides, and clear streams bubbled over rocks. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows in riots of color. The air was thin and clean, and Priscilla found herself breathing deeply, trying to fill her lungs with this new beginning. Jacob rode beside her, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing tidbits of information about the area. He spoke of mountain lions and bears, of harsh winters and beautiful springs, of the gold miners who still clung to the dream of striking it rich. He was an easy conversationalist, never pushing for responses, but seeming content with silence when it fell. They stopped by a stream to rest the horses and eat the lunch Mrs. Chen had packed for them. Priscilla sat on a sun-warmed rock and watched Jacob tend to the animals, his movements efficient and practiced. He was clearly a man comfortable in the wilderness, at home in the wild places. "Do you miss Texas?" she asked suddenly. Jacob looked up from checking the mare's hooves. "Sometimes. I miss the open sky, the way you can see for miles in every direction, but I do not miss the heat or the dust storms or the rattlesnakes." He smiled slightly. "Every place has its trade-offs, I suppose. You have family there still, a father and 2 older brothers. We do not keep in touch much. We did not part on the best terms when I left." Jacob's expression shuddered slightly. "My father wanted me to stay and work the family ranch, to be content with the life he had planned for me. But I wanted more than that, or different than that anyway, so I left, and he has not quite forgiven me for it." Priscilla heard the old pain in his voice. "I am sorry." Families should support each other, not hold each other back. Should, yes, but should and do are often very different things. Jacob finished with the mare and came to sit beside Priscilla on the rock. "What about your parents? Were they good to you and Samuel?" "The best," Priscilla said, her throat tightening. "They loved us fiercely, supported our dreams even when those dreams were impractical. My father taught me to read from his own books, which was unusual for a farmer's daughter. My mother taught me that a woman could be strong and soft at the same time, that there was no shame in either." She blinked back tears. "I miss them every day. And now I miss Samuel too. Some days it feels like I am carrying the weight of all that missing and it will crush me under its burden." Jacob was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Grief is like that. It is a weight you carry, and some days it is heavier than others. But I think over time you learn how to carry it better. It never goes away entirely, but it becomes a part of you rather than something separate trying to drag you down. At least, that is what I have observed. Have you lost people close to you? My mother when I was 16. A friend in a stampede during a cattle drive. Others along the way." Jacob picked up a pebble and tossed it into the stream. "Loss is part of living, I suppose. We cannot have the joy without risking the grief. But knowing that does not make the grief any easier to bear." They sat together in companionable silence, 2 people bound by convenience and circumstance, sharing the weight of their respective sorrows. Priscilla found, somewhat to her surprise, that she did not mind Jacob's company. He did not try to fix her pain or tell her to move past it. He simply acknowledged it and sat with her in it, and that was a gift more precious than he probably knew. The Grant Ranch came into view just after noon, and Priscilla's breath caught in her throat. It was beautiful. A wide valley stretched out before them, green with grass and dotted with grazing cattle. A river ran along the eastern edge, its water clear and swift. The house sat on a slight rise, a two-story structure made of logs and stone with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. There were outbuildings in various states of repair, a barn, corrals, and beyond it all, the mountains rose like sentinels. "What do you think?" Jacob asked, and Priscilla heard the nervousness in his voice. He cared what she thought. Her opinion mattered to him. "I think it is the most beautiful place I have ever seen," she said honestly. Jacob's smile was wide and genuine, transforming his face from merely handsome to something that made Priscilla's heart skip. "Wait until you see the inside of the house. It needs work, but the structure is sound. We can make it into whatever we want it to be." Thomas Grant was waiting on the porch, and Priscilla was struck by how frail he looked. He must have been a big man once, broad and strong like Jacob, but illness had whittled him down to sinew and bone. His hair was white, his face deeply lined, but his eyes were sharp and assessing as they dismounted. "Jacob, you are back," Thomas said, his voice rough. "And you brought company." "This is my wife, Priscilla," Jacob said, and Priscilla felt a small thrill at hearing herself described that way. "We were married 2 days ago. Priscilla, this is Thomas Grant, the finest rancher I have ever had the privilege of working for." Thomas's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Wife, last I checked, you were a confirmed bachelor with no interest in settling down." "Plans change," Jacob said easily. "Priscilla and I met in Downieville, and we decided to make a life together. She will be helping me run the ranch once we finalize our arrangement." Thomas studied Priscilla with those sharp eyes, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he was seeing straight through to her soul. But whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. "Any woman willing to take on this stubborn cowboy and this hard life has my respect," Thomas said. "Welcome, Priscilla Hayes. Come inside and let us talk business." The inside of the house was as beautiful as the outside, with high ceilings, large windows, and a massive stone fireplace that dominated the main room. The furniture was worn but well made, and there were signs everywhere of a life well lived. Photographs on the mantel, books on shelves, a quilt draped over the back of a chair. Thomas poured them coffee and they sat at a large wooden table. The negotiations were straightforward. Jacob had already saved most of the agreed-upon price, and Thomas was willing to accept a promissory note for the remainder, to be paid over the next 2 years. In exchange, Jacob would receive the land, the house, the cattle, the horses, and all the equipment. Thomas would take only his personal belongings and move to San Francisco to live with his daughter. "My wife loved this place," Thomas said, running a gnarled hand over the table. "We built it together, raised our children here, buried our dreams and hopes in this soil. I had always thought I would die here too, but the body has other plans, it seems, and my daughter worries. So I am selling to someone I trust will care for the land the way Martha and I did." He looked at Jacob, then at Priscilla. "You will be good stewards of this place. I can see that. So let us make it official." They signed the papers that afternoon with Thomas's lawyer present as witness, and just like that, Jacob owned a ranch. They owned a ranch, Priscilla corrected herself. Jacob had said she was his partner, his equal. This was as much hers as his, at least in theory. Thomas planned to leave within the week. Until then, he would stay in the house and show them everything they needed to know about running the property. Jacob already knew quite a bit from his months of working there, but there were always details only the owner would know. Water rights, boundary disputes, which neighbors were friendly and which were trouble, where the cattle liked to graze in different seasons. That first night, Priscilla stood on the porch as the sun set over the mountains and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Real, tangible hope for the future. This place could be a home. With time and work and care, she could build a life here. Maybe not the life she had once dreamed of, but a good life nonetheless. Jacob came to stand beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking that maybe miracles do happen," Priscilla said softly. "A week ago, I was kneeling on church steps with no hope and no future. Now I am standing on the porch of a beautiful ranch with a new name and a new life ahead of me. If that is not a miracle, I do not know what is." Jacob turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his eyes were very dark and very warm. "I was thinking the same thing. A week ago, I was a drifter with a pocket full of money and no particular place to be. Now I have a ranch and a wife and a purpose. Funny how fast life can change." "Wife in name only," Priscilla reminded him gently. "Let us not forget our arrangement." "I have not forgotten," Jacob said, but there was something in his tone that made Priscilla think he might wish their arrangement was different. Or maybe she was just projecting her own confused feelings onto him. But even a wife in name only is still a wife. We are in this together now, Priscilla. Partners. Friends, I hope, in time. "Friends," Priscilla agreed. "I would like that." They stood together as the stars began to emerge, two near strangers bound by vows and circumstance, at the beginning of something neither of them quite understood yet. But the night was beautiful, the air was sweet with pine and grass, and for the first time since Samuel's death, Priscilla felt like she might be able to breathe again. The first weeks on the ranch passed in a blur of hard work and new routines. Thomas left for San Francisco, and suddenly, the entire property was theirs to manage. Jacob woke before dawn every morning to see to the cattle and horses. Priscilla tackled the house, which needed a deep cleaning and numerous repairs after years of being tended by a grieving widower with failing health. They fell into an easy partnership. Jacob would come in for breakfast, his hair damp from washing at the pump, and Priscilla would have coffee ready and food on the table. They would discuss the day's tasks, dividing responsibilities based on skills and necessity. Then Jacob would head out to work the land, and Priscilla would work on the house. She scrubbed floors until her hands were raw. She beat rugs and washed windows and mended curtains. She inventoried the pantry and made lists of supplies they would need from town. She planted a vegetable garden in the plot that had once been Martha Grant's pride and joy, coaxing seeds into the earth and praying they would take root. In the evenings, after the work was done and supper was eaten, they would sit on the porch and talk. These were Priscilla's favorite times. Jacob would tell her about his day, about the cattle or the land or his plans for improvements. She would share her own progress, her ideas for the house, her observations about the ranch. They talked about their pasts, carefully at first and then with increasing openness. They talked about their hopes for the future, about what they wanted to build here. And slowly, carefully, they began to know each other. Priscilla learned that Jacob was a morning person who became grumpy if he did not get his coffee. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that took her by surprise and made her laugh. She learned that he was patient with animals and impatient with inefficiency. She learned that he read books, which surprised her, and that his favorite was a worn copy of Moby Dick that he had carried with him for years. Jacob learned that Priscilla sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs in a sweet, clear voice. He learned that she was stubborn and proud and hated asking for help even when she clearly needed it. He learned that she had nightmares about Samuel's death and would sometimes wake in the middle of the night, crying. He learned that she was fiercely intelligent and had opinions about everything from politics to philosophy to the best way to make bread. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, likes and dislikes. They learned to work around each other in the kitchen, to anticipate each other's needs, to communicate without words. It was not the passionate romance of novels, but it was something perhaps more valuable, a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. But beneath the friendship, something else was growing. Priscilla began to notice things about Jacob that had nothing to do with their partnership and everything to do with the fact that he was a man and she was a woman. The way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he worked, the sound of his laugh, the gentleness of his hands when he handled an injured animal, the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, with something warm and longing in his eyes. And she suspected he was noticing things about her too. She caught him watching her as she hung laundry, as she brushed her hair on the porch, as she moved around the kitchen. There was an awareness between them, an electric current that had not been there at the beginning. It made Priscilla nervous and excited in equal measure. They were living as brother and sister, sleeping in separate rooms, maintaining propriety. But they were not siblings. They were husband and wife, legally and lawfully wed, and denying the attraction that was building between them was becoming increasingly difficult. One evening, about 6 weeks after they moved to the ranch, Priscilla was preparing supper when she sliced her hand on a knife. It was a deep cut, bleeding heavily, and she gasped in pain. Jacob was at her side instantly, having heard her gasp from the other room. He took her hand in his, examining the wound with practiced efficiency. "It is not too deep, but it needs to be cleaned and bandaged. Come here, sit down." He led her to a chair and retrieved the medical supplies they kept in a cabinet. Then he knelt in front of her and carefully cleaned the wound. His touch was gentle, his hand steady, and Priscilla found herself very aware of his proximity. He was so close she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell the scent of leather and outdoors that always clung to him. "Does it hurt?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes," Priscilla admitted, "but I have had worse." Jacob's jaw tightened. He wrapped a clean cloth around her hand, his fingers lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. When he looked up at her, there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "You are always so strong," he said quietly. "Always pushing through, never complaining. But you do not have to be strong all the time, Priscilla, not with me." "I do not know how to be anything else," she whispered. "Then let me teach you." Jacob's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing just below her eye. "You have been through so much, carried so much. Let me help carry it. That is what partners do, what friends do." Priscilla felt tears well up, hot and unexpected. She had been holding everything together for so long, had forced herself to keep moving forward through sheer determination. But Jacob's kindness, his steady presence, was breaking down her walls brick by brick. "I miss him," she said, her voice breaking. "I miss Samuel so much, and sometimes the guilt of moving forward, of building this life without him, feels like it will swallow me whole." "He would want you to move forward," Jacob said firmly. "He would want you to be happy, to build a good life." Honoring his memory does not mean stopping your own life. It means living well, loving well, being the person he believed you could be. The tears spilled over then, and Jacob pulled her into his arms, letting her cry against his shoulder. He held her firmly, one hand in her hair, the other wrapped around her waist, and Priscilla clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath her feet. When the tears finally subsided, Priscilla pulled back, embarrassed. "I am sorry. I got your shirt all wet." "I do not care about the shirt," Jacob said. His hands were still on her shoulders, and he was looking at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Priscilla, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" He took a breath, and she could see him gathering courage. "This arrangement we have, this marriage of convenience. I know we agreed it would be purely practical, no expectations beyond partnership. But I need you to know that my feelings have changed, are changing, have been changing since the moment I met you." Priscilla's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Jacob, let me finish," he said gently. "I am not asking you to change our arrangement if you do not want to. I am not pressuring you for anything. I just need to be honest with you like we agreed. I care about you, Priscilla. More than I plan to, more than I probably should. You have become important to me, and not just as a business partner. And if you feel even a fraction of what I am feeling, I would like the chance to court you properly. To see if this partnership could become something more." Priscilla stared at him, her mind racing. He cared for her. This man who had saved her, who had married her, who had given her a home and a future, cared for her. And the truth was, she cared for him too. She had been trying not to, had been trying to keep her heart locked away and safe. But Jacob had slipped past her defenses anyway, with his kindness and his patience and his steady, reliable presence. "I care for you too," she said quietly. "I have been trying not to, trying to keep things purely practical like we agreed, but you make that very difficult." Jacob's smile was slow and warm and made something flutter in Priscilla's chest. "So what do we do about it?" "We could court," Priscilla said. "Properly, like you said. We are already married, which makes it somewhat unconventional, but when has anything about us been conventional?" "Courting while married," Jacob said, his eyes dancing with amusement. "I like it. So, Priscilla Hayes, would you do me the honor of allowing me to court you?" "Yes, Jacob Hayes," Priscilla said, feeling suddenly light and giddy. "I believe I would." And then, because it felt like the most natural thing in the world, Jacob leaned forward and kissed her. It was soft and sweet, a question more than a demand, and Priscilla answered by kissing him back. Her injured hand came up to rest on his chest, and she could feel his heart racing as fast as hers. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Jacob rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Then why did you wait?" "Because I wanted you to be sure. I did not want you to feel pressured or obligated." Jacob pulled back to look at her. "You have had so much taken from you, so many choices stolen. I wanted this to be your choice, freely made with no coercion." Priscilla felt her throat tighten with emotion. How had she gotten so lucky? To find this man in her darkest hour, to be given this second chance at happiness. "You are a good man, Jacob Hayes." "I am a man who is falling in love with his wife," Jacob said simply. "Which is probably how it should have been from the beginning, but we took the scenic route, falling in love." The words hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. Priscilla was not quite ready to say them back, not yet, but she could feel the truth of them settling into her bones. She was falling in love with him too. Maybe she had been since that first day, when he had knelt beside her on the church steps and offered to be the answer to her prayer. The courting period was both wonderful and frustrating. They continued to sleep in separate rooms, but now there were stolen kisses in the kitchen, held hands during evening walks, long conversations that stretched late into the night. Jacob brought Priscilla wildflowers and sang to her in a surprisingly decent baritone. Priscilla baked his favorite foods and left notes in his coat pockets for him to find during the day. They worked side by side on the ranch, and Priscilla discovered she loved this life. She loved the physicality of the work, the way her body grew stronger and more capable. She loved watching the cattle graze in the valley, loved the sound of the river, loved the way the mountains looked different at every hour of the day. She loved the satisfaction of sitting down to a meal made from food she had grown herself, in a house she had cleaned and maintained, on land that was hers as much as Jacob's. And she loved Jacob more each day, in ways that surprised her. She loved his quiet strength, his dry humor, his patience with her grief and her healing. She loved the way he listened when she talked, really listened, like her words mattered. She loved the way he pushed her to try new things but never made her feel inadequate when she struggled. She loved the way he kissed her, like she was precious and breakable and strong all at once. 3 months after they moved to the ranch, on a crisp autumn evening with the leaves turning gold and red on the mountainsides, Jacob asked her if she was ready to make their marriage real in every sense. They were sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the evening chill. Priscilla was leaning against Jacob's shoulder, his arm around her waist, watching the stars emerge. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, being held by him, and Priscilla realized she could not remember the last time she had thought of their marriage as merely a business arrangement. "I want to be your wife in truth," Jacob said quietly. "Not just on paper, not just in name. I want to share my life with you fully in every way. I love you, Priscilla. I am completely, irrevocably in love with you. And if you feel the same, I would like to stop sleeping in separate rooms and start building a real marriage together." Priscilla turned in his arms to face him. In the dim light, she could just make out his features, the earnest hope in his eyes. "I love you too," she said, and felt the truth of it sing through her. "I think I have loved you since you knelt beside me on those church steps and offered me hope when I had none. You saved me, Jacob. In every way a person can be saved." "You saved me too," Jacob said, his hand coming up to cradle her face. "I was just drifting before you, going through the motions of living but not really alive. You gave me purpose, gave me something to build toward. You made me want to be better, to do better. You made me want to put down roots and stay." Priscilla kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into it. Jacob responded with equal fervor, his arms tightening around her, and for a long moment they simply held each other, two people who had found home in each other. That night, Priscilla moved her things into Jacob's room, into their room, and they began their marriage anew. Not as strangers bound by convenience, but as lovers bound by choice. And if there was still grief in Priscilla's heart for all she had lost, there was also joy for all she had found. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of seasons and hard work. Winter came to the mountains, harsh and beautiful, and they huddled together by the fire on the coldest nights. Spring brought new calves and a garden bursting with life. Summer meant long days of work and longer evenings spent together on the porch. And autumn returned with its golden light, marking the anniversary of when they had first come to the ranch. They learned each other intimately, in ways beyond the physical. Priscilla learned that Jacob had nightmares sometimes too, dreams of stampedes and violence from his years of drifting. She learned to hold him through them, to be his anchor the way he had been hers. Jacob learned that Priscilla needed time alone sometimes, needed to process her emotions privately before sharing them. He learned to give her that space without taking offense. They had their fights, of course. Heated arguments about ranch business or household decisions, or 1,000 small things that did not really matter. But they learned to fight fair, to never go to bed angry, to always remember that they were on the same side. They learned that marriage was not always easy, but it was always worth it when you were with the right person. In the spring of their second year, Priscilla discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified and elated in equal measure, and when she told Jacob, he swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to be parents," he said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. We are going to have a family." "Are you ready for this?" Priscilla asked, searching his face. "For the responsibility, the chaos, the way our lives will change with you." "I am ready for anything," Jacob said firmly. He kissed her softly. "We will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else. And our child will be so loved, so wanted. What more could any baby need?" The pregnancy was not easy. Priscilla was sick for months, barely able to keep food down. But Jacob was endlessly patient, caring for her and the ranch both, never complaining about the extra burden. And as her belly grew and the baby's kicks became stronger, Priscilla fell in love all over again. With the life growing inside her, with the man who had given her this gift, with the future they were building together. Their son was born on a snowy December morning, and they named him Samuel Jacob Hayes. Little Samuel had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and from the moment Priscilla held him, she knew that every moment of pain and struggle had been worth it to get to this perfect, precious life. Jacob cried when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face as he cradled the tiny bundle. "Hello, Samuel," he whispered. "Welcome to the world, little man. Your mama and I have been waiting for you." Priscilla watched them together, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was her family. Her husband, her son, her home. She had lost so much, had walked through fire and grief to get here. But she had emerged on the other side into something beautiful. As little Samuel grew, the ranch prospered. Jacob proved to be a shrewd rancher, making smart decisions about breeding and grazing and sales. Priscilla managed the household and garden with equal skill and began taking and sewing work from neighboring ranches to bring in extra income. Together, they paid off the remainder of what they owed on the land and began saving for expansion. They made friends with their neighbors, became part of the community. They attended church in the nearest town, shared meals with other ranching families, helped their neighbors during hard times and accepted help in return. It was not the life Priscilla had once imagined for herself, but it was a good life, a full life, a life worth living. Little Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and everything on it. He followed his father everywhere, learning to ride and rope and care for animals. He had his mother's stubborn streak and his father's even temper, and he was the light of both their lives. When Samuel was 3, Priscilla gave birth to a daughter they named Martha Grace, after Thomas Grant's late wife, and in honor of the grace that had brought their family together. Martha had her mother's honey-colored hair and her father's brown eyes, and she was as headstrong as her brother was easygoing. Jacob was an attentive father, patient and playful and endlessly loving. He told his children stories, taught them about the land, held them when they cried and celebrated their triumphs. Watching him with Samuel and Martha, Priscilla fell in love with him all over again. He was everything she could have wanted in a husband and father, and more than she had ever dared to hope for. On a summer evening when little Samuel was 5 and Martha was 2, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset. The children were playing at their feet, building towers from wooden blocks that Jacob had carved. Priscilla was leaning against her husband's shoulder, his arm around her waist, and she felt a profound sense of contentment. "You ever think about that day we met?" Jacob asked quietly. "On the church steps in Downieville. All the time," Priscilla admitted. "I think about how desperate I was, how hopeless I felt. I think about how you appeared like an answer to a prayer I barely had the courage to speak." "I think about it too," Jacob said. "I think about how close I came to riding past that church without stopping. I almost did, you know. I was in a hurry to get back to the ranch, but something made me stop. Call it fate, call it divine intervention, call it whatever you want, but I am grateful every day that I did." Priscilla turned to look at him, this man who had saved her and loved her and built a life with her. You told me that day that you would be the answer to my prayer. And you were, Jacob. You truly were. But you gave me more than I prayed for. You gave me love, a family, a home. You gave me a reason to keep living when I thought I had lost everything worth living for. You gave me the same, Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. I was just existing before you, Priscilla, going through the motions but not really living. You taught me what it means to have a home, to have a family, to have a purpose beyond just surviving. You taught me what love really is. Little Samuel looked up at his parents then, his dark eyes curious. Mama, Papa, why are you crying? Priscilla laughed and wiped at her eyes, not having realized tears were falling. Happy tears, sweetheart. Sometimes people cry when they are very, very happy. Are you happy? Samuel asked seriously. The happiest I have ever been, Priscilla assured him. She reached down to tousle his hair, then scooped up Martha, who had toddled over demanding attention. I have everything I could ever want right here. Jacob pulled them all close, his strong arms wrapping around his entire family. We are blessed, he said quietly. Every single day we are blessed. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the Hayes family sat together on their porch. 2 children born of love, 2 parents who had found each other in the darkness and built a life in the light. A ranch that thrived under their care, land that would be passed down to their children and their children's children. And at the center of it all, a love story that had begun with a prayer and a promise. A cowboy who had found a woman waiting for a miracle, who had said, "Let me be the answer to your prayer," and had spent every day since making good on that promise. Years passed, and the Hayes Ranch became known throughout the region as one of the best-run operations in the Sierra Nevada. Jacob's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher spread, and Priscilla's garden and sewing brought in steady income. They added to their herd, improved their buildings, and built a legacy. More children came. Another son they named Thomas, in honor of the man who had sold them the ranch, and finally another daughter named Elizabeth. The house that had once felt empty and sad was now filled with the chaos and joy of 4 active children. There were scraped knees and childhood illnesses, first days of school and riding lessons, bedtime stories and family dinners around the table that Thomas Grant had once loved. Samuel grew into a responsible young man who shared his father's love of ranching. Martha proved to have her mother's head for business and her father's way with animals. Thomas was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book. And Elizabeth was pure sunshine, bringing laughter wherever she went. Through it all, Jacob and Priscilla's love deepened and matured. They grew together rather than apart, facing challenges as a united front and celebrating triumphs as a team. They still had their evening talks on the porch, still held hands during walks, still kissed each other goodbye every morning and hello every evening. The passion of their early days mellowed into something richer and more sustaining, a love built on friendship and respect and deep, abiding affection. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob surprised Priscilla with a trip back to Downieville. They left the children with a trusted neighbor and rode together through the mountains, retracing the path they had taken so long ago. The town had changed little, still rough and wild, still clinging to its dreams of gold, but it looked different through Priscilla's eyes now. It was no longer the place of her greatest tragedy, but the place where her greatest blessing had begun. They stood together in front of the church where they had first met. The building looked smaller than Priscilla remembered, more weathered. But the steps were the same, worn and wooden and holding the memory of her darkest moment. "I was so lost that day," Priscilla said quietly, staring at those steps. "So broken. I truly believed my life was over." "And now?" Jacob asked. Now I know that sometimes endings are really beginnings in disguise." Priscilla turned to him, taking both his hands in hers. "You gave me a new beginning when I needed it most. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me love when I thought I would never love again. And you have spent every day since showing me what it means to be truly cherished." Jacob pulled her close, holding her the way he had held her 1,000 times before, and yet it felt as special as the first time. "I love you, Priscilla Hayes. I loved you from the moment I saw you on these steps, though I did not recognize it at the time. I loved you when I offered to help you when I married you, when I learned who you were beneath the grief and the pain. And I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Priscilla said, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you for saving me, for seeing me, for choosing me every single day. You are the answer to my prayer, Jacob. You always have been. You always will be." They kissed there on the church steps where their story had begun. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life in the light. It was not the fairy tale romance of storybooks with its instant love and effortless happiness. It was better. It was real. It was hard-won and deeply felt and absolutely true. When they returned to the ranch, their children rushed to greet them, full of stories about their week and demands for the gifts their parents had surely brought back. Jacob and Priscilla laughed and distributed the small toys and candies they had purchased, then gathered their family close. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Jacob and Priscilla sat on their porch as they had done 1,000 evenings before. The stars were bright overhead, and the sound of the river carried on the night air. "You have any regrets?" Jacob asked suddenly. Priscilla considered the question. Did she regret the path that had brought her here? The loss of her family, the tragedy that had forced her west, the desperation that had led her to marry a stranger. "No," she said finally. "I regret the pain that brought me here, the losses I suffered. I will always grieve for my parents and Samuel, but I do not regret where I ended up. I do not regret you or our children or this life we have built. All of it, the good and the bad, led me here. And here is exactly where I want to be. Even though it started with tragedy, especially because it started with tragedy," Priscilla said firmly. "Because it taught me that even in our darkest moments, there is hope. Even when we think we have lost everything, new beginnings are possible. And sometimes the very thing that breaks us is the thing that allows us to be remade into something stronger and more beautiful than we were before." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You are the strongest person I know, Priscilla. Not because you never break, but because you always find a way to rebuild. You take the broken pieces and create something new and beautiful from them. You did it with your own heart, and you helped me do it with mine." "We rebuilt each other," Priscilla corrected. "That is what love does. It does not erase the pain or the past. It gives us the strength to carry it and the courage to keep moving forward." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, hearts beating in sync. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen each other every day since, who had built a family and a legacy, and a love that would endure long after they were gone. As the years continued to pass, the Hayes family flourished. The children grew into capable adults, each finding their own path while remaining deeply connected to the ranch and each other. Samuel took over more and more of the ranch operations as Jacob's hair turned silver. Martha married a neighboring rancher's son and started her own family nearby. Thomas went to college and became a teacher, but returned every summer to help with the ranch. Elizabeth, the baby, proved to have a gift for horses and began breeding and training them. Jacob and Priscilla grew old together, their faces lined with age and their bodies slower than they once were, but their love never wavering. They continued their evening talks on the porch, though now their chairs had cushions for aching joints. They continued to hold hands during walks, though the walks were shorter and slower. They continued to kiss each other goodbye and hello, though the kisses were softer and sweeter than the passionate embraces of their youth. On a spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming and the cattle were grazing peacefully in the valley, Jacob and Priscilla stood together at the graves they had prepared on a hill overlooking the ranch. Someday they would rest here together, but for now they came to tend the flowers they had planted and to reflect on the life they had built. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Priscilla asked, her hand clasped in Jacob's. "You said, 'Let me be the answer to your prayer.'" "I remember," Jacob said, his voice still strong despite his years. "And was I? Did I give you what you needed?" Priscilla turned to him, this man who had been her husband for over 30 years, who had given her children and grandchildren, who had built a life and a legacy with her. She looked into his brown eyes, still warm and kind despite the years, and smiled. "You gave me more than I needed," she said. "You gave me everything. You gave me hope when I was hopeless, strength when I was weak, love when I thought I would never love again. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me a life worth living. So yes, my darling Jacob, you were the answer to my prayer. And I thank God every day that you stopped your horse in front of that church, that you took the time to kneel beside a broken woman and offer her hope." Jacob pulled her close, and they stood together overlooking the land they had worked and loved for 3 decades. Below them, their children and grandchildren moved about the ranch, continuing the legacy they had built. The house they had made a home stood solid and welcoming. The cattle grazed on healthy grass. The river ran clear and strong. "We did good, did we not?" Jacob said softly. "We did better than good," Priscilla replied. "We built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. We created love from convenience, family from loneliness, hope from despair. We proved that miracles do happen, and sometimes they come in the form of a cowboy who stops to help a stranger." They stood together as the sun climbed higher in the sky, 2 souls who had found each other in the wilderness and had never let go. Their story had begun with a prayer and a promise, and it had unfolded into a life rich with love and meaning and joy. And when, years later, they were laid to rest side by side on that hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, their children and grandchildren gathered to mourn and celebrate 2 lives well lived. They told stories of Jacob's kindness and Priscilla's strength, of a love that had endured through decades and difficulties, of a partnership that had built something lasting and true. The ranch continued under the careful stewardship of their descendants, the Hayes name becoming synonymous with integrity and hard work throughout the region. The story of how Jacob and Priscilla met became family legend, passed down through generations. A cowboy who found a woman waiting for a miracle, who said, "Let me be the answer to your prayer," and who spent his life making good on that promise. Their love story became the foundation upon which their family was built, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, hope is possible. That sometimes strangers become saviors, that practical arrangements can blossom into passionate love, and that the best miracles are often the ones we never see coming. And high on that hill, 2 graves side by side faced the sunrise, marking the resting place of 2 people who had loved deeply, lived fully, and left behind a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The inscription on their shared headstone reads simply, "Jacob and Priscilla Hayes, beloved partners in life and love. Together they built a miracle, the end."